Okay, so hello everyone. As chair of the SECED Young Members Subcommittee, it's my pleasure to welcome you all today to our event on professional accreditation in the field of engineering dynamics. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping rules that I'd like to quickly run through. So please can everyone keep their videos off and microphones on mute during the presentations. We will then have a Q&A session after we've heard from each of the panel about their route to chartership and things they wish they'd known. So for the Q&A, please type your questions in the chat or raise your hand and you can come off mute to ask it in the Q&A. Now, your name and email address will be recorded on a list of participants, and the list will be used for improving our services in the future. We won't pass on your details to any third party, and we won't send any unsolicited emails. But if you do not want to be included on the list of participants for this event, please contact us on the email address that I'll put in the chat. And the last point is that this event will be recorded and it'll be uploaded onto an online platform that we're currently setting up. So by dialing into this event, you consent to any information or views you share during the seminar being made public. So moving on to the event itself. This lunchtime, we're fortunate to have a panel of 6 chartered engineers from the SECED committee and the Young Members Subcommittee who are currently working in dynamics and have volunteered to share their advice and discuss opportunities and challenges they experienced on their route to chartership. We'll start by hearing, I'll just move this. So we'll start by hearing from each of the panel about their route to chartership and things they wish they'd known. On the slide here are 4 questions that we've asked the panel to answer in about 5 minutes. So that'll take up about the next 30 minutes, after which we'll have an open Q&A session where everyone can ask questions. So do that either by typing in the chat or raising your hand and unmuting. So please do start to think of questions that you'd like to ask our panel. So as part of these questions, I've asked the panel to introduce themselves, so I won't do that now. I'll hand over to our panel to start going through to start our event. We've agreed that we'll go in alphabetical order. So Andreas, do you want to kick us off? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Fiona. So my name is Andreas Nielsen, and I'm currently a principal engineer with Atkins in Glasgow. And I'm a chartered engineer with the Institution of Civil Engineers. I also fulfill a role as supervising civil engineer for 6 of our graduates in the company. So that was question 1 and 2. For questions 3 and 4, I'm going to approach it in a slightly roundabout way, I think. And if at all possible, I'm going to try and just share a slide or 2. So are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. I don't know whether you're seeing the slide. Anyway, there we go. There we go. So what you see here is some of you may recognize it. It's probably the greatest structure from my homeland. It's the Great Belt Bridge in Denmark. And when I was going through university, this bridge was nearing completion. And as a freshman in university, I remember that the news were full of stories at the time about how cracks had been found in some of the great anchor blocks that are part of the bridge. And the way these news were presented, it seemed like it was almost like a national disaster in the making. It seemed like the bridge was about to collapse any day, or at least it would have to be completely demolished and rebuilt. So it seemed like a huge scandal. Anyway, a few weeks later, the technical lead for the bridge came to the university and gave a guest lecture. And addressing the news that were dominating the news at that time, he kind of shrugged and said that, well, the cracks are mere mosquito bites. And that struck quite a chord with me. That seemed quite extraordinary to me. So here was a man who had the coolness and confidence and mastery of his subject to dismiss these apparently fatal cracks as mere mosquito bites that would soon be mended. And of course, he was right. As we all know, cracks in reinforced concrete is not actually a huge problem. It can often be just mended very easily. So, but it was the confidence that he had that really struck me. And I know that many of you maybe feel that you, in your route to Chartership, maybe you sometimes feel that you wish you had more confidence. So that brings me on to this slide, which shows the well-known Dunningkruger effect. I don't know how well known it is, but it shows the relationship between, on one hand, confidence, and on the other hand, competence. And at the lower end of the scale, so with low competence, it indicates that you probably have too much confidence in your own abilities. And I can certainly think of a few characters in the current government that applies to. But a classical example also being a bank robber, and this is a true story, a bank robber who smeared lemon juice onto his face before doing his crime because he'd read somewhere that lemon juice can be used to create invisible ink. So he thought he would become invisible by this cunning trick. But then as you gain more competence, as you gain more experience and knowledge, you can see that your confidence dips. You become more aware of how complex a subject really is. You learn that what you thought was straightforward or what was simple is actually not that simple, but is more complex. And you begin to understand the limits of your own experience and knowledge. And that's maybe where you are in the first couple of years after graduating from university. You come out from university, and in the field of dynamics, you think you know it all. You know what eigenmodes are. You know how to solve differential equations. You know about orthogonality of eigenmodes and so on. And you can knock up a finite element model in no time. But then as you become more and more knowledgeable about your subject, you realize how complex it really is. And it's only when you gain a lot of competence, knowledge, and experience that you can begin to climb the confidence curve. So at the crucial point before your professional review, you may be at that low point of confidence, and that might affect you before you go into the professional review. You think, oh, all the things I don't know about. But really, my advice to you would be to, maybe knock up your own confidence a bit. And remember that at the professional review, what the reviewers are really looking for is, would this candidate make the right decision when in a position of responsibility? So it's not just about what you know, it's also about knowing the limits of your knowledge and knowing where to go to seek information. And that's the professional judgment of attribute that the reviewers are looking for. So I think that brings me to the end of my 5 minutes. I will stop my presentation and hand over to the next person.
Thanks, Andreas. Over to you, Barnali.
Hi everyone. My name is Barnali. I am a technical director in Mott MacDonald, and I look after the earthquake business. I am now a SC supervising engineer and I do a lot of interviews for candidates who are going for the professional review. I seem to have made a reputation for myself where I see a lot of graduates from the company, they email me and say, can you sit? Because whenever somebody has gone through an interview with you, they've always passed. So that's the kind of reputation I've made for myself. the second, I think the second question that I think was more very, very relevant for me was when I was starting to get chartered, I was coming from a different angle. I had finished my PhD at Cambridge University, and then I joined ARUP. Ziggy, who is here, was my first boss, and then I was coming, so I was not a graduate. I did not think that it was necessary for me to join the graduate scheme to become chartered. So then the question option was, what should I be doing? And it took a little bit of thought at that time because there were not that many people from where I could seek advice. Most people, similar circumstances were not similar to me. So when I started looking at the attributes, I realized that some of these attributes are possibly which I have already fulfilled doing a 3 years PhD and a postdoc, but there were some where I had large gap. So I think the most important thing for me was to understand where my knowledge gaps were and then work on a development plan which would help me to fulfill those knowledge gaps. Now, if you are working in structural dynamics or seismic, one of the things which is a difficulty for us, we often do not work on a project which is long enough, which can become your just project example in the report, in the final report that you submit. And we may be doing lots of small projects. Certainly in my case, that was the case that I was doing a lot of small projects. And so I had to pick up different attributes from each of these smaller projects so that I could present a coherent story. And that kind of takes a bit of lateral thinking. So I thought, why don't I show you just an example of how I did that in my thesis, in my submission. So I split it up into, if you can see my screen, I split it into my PhD experience because if any of you are following advanced studies and thinking of becoming chartered, please accept the reality that you are doing a lot of work there, which can help in taking a lot of these attributes. So for example, I split it up to my PhD experience where I had some people, Fiona might recognize this, the centrifuge tests at Cambridge and a picture with Ralph Peck. So essentially just showing the different type of experiences that you would gather, the amount of technical knowledge that you would get, the presentations that you would do, the communications and managing different stakeholders. All of these attributes are actually fulfilled when you are doing a PhD. It's just a question of lateral thinking and pulling up all those experiences to make a coherent case to yourself and to show the professional judgment as was mentioned by the previous speaker. One of the other things I also did was I picked up my postdoc experience as well and tried to, so essentially what I am, the key message that I want to give you, you may not have all of the experience in one package, but you have to kind of pull yourself and get the experience from wherever you can and see it, present it in a form that it makes it look like you are a complete candidate. The other interesting part was, as I mentioned, that there were projects were all of different type of projects. So in that space, I had different projects where some projects which focused on commercial aspects and some projects which focused on health and safety aspects. So this kind of attitude helped me to fulfill all the attributes and actually become chartered. Now, one of the other things I realized was keeping good record of your CPD was really, really helpful. And sometimes I wish now that you can do it online in the ICE website. It's a really good scheme. I sometimes wish that there was an app that was available so that whenever we are doing some CPD, we could fulfill that, because I think most people, they fall up. It's quite a big challenge when they have to record their CPDs. Recently, last year, I became a fellow of ICE, and also the same thing applied there. Having good records was extremely useful. So my message to all of you who are working in dynamics and trying to get chartered is that please look for opportunities. think laterally. Do not get bogged down by the fact that you have to fulfill these attributes. Just look, every project provides the possibility. And also, one of the key advice that I give to people is becoming chartered, the onus is on you as an individual. The process has to be driven by you, and then there are a lot of experience around your company, colleagues, form networks who will all help you, but the primary driver has to be from you. I'll now like to hand it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Barnali. Chris, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so I'll start out with an introduction, and I'll actually spend a few minutes on this first question because there's a few things I wanted to say during that. So, hello, I'm Chris Pearce, and I started my journey towards being a chartered engineer at the University of Exeter when I studied mechanical engineering. And towards the end of my degree, I didn't really feel like I knew what field of engineering I really wanted to work in. But I had an inkling, since I was really interested in dynamic events and how structures and systems respond and move, and also finite element analysis and computer-aided engineering as well. So interestingly, at this time, an opportunity came up for a PhD scholarship. It was advertised within the university in the field of biomechanics, and it was going to involve studying head impact and studying the mechanisms that would cause damage to the brain during impact through finite element simulation. And the purpose was in order to sort of help inform safety systems and injury mitigation. So it's not really an area I'd considered before that much at all, but I'd like the fact that I could sort of link it directly to sort of hopefully being of benefit to others. And also it involved those areas of dynamics and computer modeling that I was really interested in. So I did end up applying for that and thankfully was awarded that scholarship. And I completed my PhD at Exeter under Professor Philippe Young. And it was a really good experience with ups and downs, of course, like any big project. But I'm glad I did it and I learned a lot. And then at the end of that experience, I had a much clearer idea, actually, after that, a few more years of sort of working in that field, I suppose, of what I'd really like to do with my career. And I'd kind of came to the conclusion that I'd still want to work in those areas that I described, so dynamics and potentially related to computer modeling, but not necessarily in a biomechanical context. But particularly, I'd sort of identified that engineering consultancy was probably the variety and type of work that really interested me. So I ended up applying to Atkins and thankfully was accepted. And I joined in 2014 and have been working since then in a team specializing in structural dynamics and structural integrity assessments. So I've worked in a few different fields, mainly in offshore wind and the nuclear sectors since I joined. So the reason I wanted to say all that is just to show you that you never really know what's going to happen and where your career is going to take you. I'm still quite early in my career myself, but there's been a few changes and twists and turns there, I suppose. And so the key thing that really stood out to me was that different fields of engineering are not mutually exclusive by any means. There's so many valuable transferable skills, and you shouldn't see working in one field as in any way being a blocker to something else later in your career. So I guess on to question two. I'm chartered with the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and I became chartered in 2018. I'm not currently a mentor or the equivalent of a DEUSCE at the moment. So in terms of question three, about the main challenges I faced, like I mentioned, while I was working towards chartership, I was part of this team specializing in structural dynamics and structural integrity assessments. So during that time, I was involved in quite a sort of variety of projects in different sectors, so across fields like blast, nuclear, and offshore wind, and so on. And I definitely got a lot from this variety of experience in different markets. But I was aware that this experience might kind of appear disjointed and perhaps difficult to communicate during my professional review interview. So I guess to tie that all together, and I think this is probably quite standard advice, but for me, I really found it vital that in order to be able to communicate a sort of clear route of progression and be able to help keep track of the progress I'd made to across these different types of projects, I wanted to not get bogged down in the differences between the projects, but focus in each of them on the core competencies that we need to develop and demonstrate. So for this, I really found it important to clearly document tasks that I was working on and as I was going through these. And of course, not just involvement in project tasks, but also non-project initiatives as well, such as STEM activities or helping out towards perhaps recruitment activities within your team. And doing that logging on a really regular basis mapped against competencies. So that was sort of question 3. I guess in terms of question 4 and further advice, I'd also say, don't underestimate the experience that you've gained from the tasks within your current role. So similar to what the previous speaker was saying, I definitely agree with Barnali's point about thinking laterally about what activities you've completed that demonstrate the various competencies required by UK Spec, which all of the institutions obviously tie back to in terms of those core competencies. So those experiences may be different from what you might have initially thought was required. So obviously have that conversation with your mentor or your DE or SC, and obviously they have that really useful perspective, and they need to agree and check that the experience is sufficient and is developing sufficiently. But be sure to discuss with them the many different ways that those competencies can be developed. So be aware that the competencies that may appear difficult for graduate engineers to develop can be gained through non-project activities as well. So as an example, what I'd like to say for one of them is one activity I was involved with that went towards demonstrating technical leadership. The competency of technical leadership was actually not a project activity necessarily, but I went through that process of helping our team update our quality assurance documents that would fill out during project work. So that pro forma, the process of researching what was needed for that and updating those documents actually was really valuable experience for that. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I'd like to pass over to the next speaker.
Great, thanks, Chris. Damian, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and the other speakers. I kind of wish I'd attended an event like this when I was struggling to justify my existence or my worthiness for chartership. So my name's Damian Grant. I'm an associate director in ARUP. I work in our specialist technology and research practice within the Advanced Digital Engineering Group. A bit of a mouthful, but I lead our structural earthquake engineering work. So originally from New Zealand, so celebrating the cricket victory from yesterday for those following. Did my PhD in earthquake engineering over in Italy, and then came over to London in 2005 for ARUP. And I've mostly been based in London since then. I had a couple of years over in the New York office, and also back in London, I had a year teaching at UCL. So my sort of institutions, I actually did my first professional registration while I was working over in the US. So I've got the professional engineer qualification over there, and it probably won't be relevant to many of the attendees, but if you do find yourself in the US, there's a kind of a two-stage process there of doing one exam to become an EIT, engineer in training, and then a second exam to get the professional engineering qualification. And that's worth doing, I think. Came back here and I've actually got chartered with possibly a lesser known institution in these circles, the Institution of Engineering and Technology. And for those who don't know, that's sort of more of a generalist engineering and technology institution, without a whole lot of background in the kind of structural civil engineering circles, but sort of developing that. So happy to talk to anyone who's interested in that institution. I think the main challenges I face, moving on to the sort of the third question, I did try to get involved in a lot of different project types, and like the previous speakers, looked for chances to take, creatively think about the ways in which those the experiences I was getting on smaller projects were contributing towards my competencies. But I did quite early on sort of cement myself in earthquake engineering projects, particularly because that was what I'd done my PhD in. And so what the really specific challenge I had was that most of my projects were abroad, and that made it quite difficult to pick up the sort of site supervision experience and practical aspects of the construction process and things that some of the institutions are really looking for. So that's kind of a negative thing. So I guess learning from my mistakes, I'd really advise folks to not really specialize too early, or if you are specializing, do try to be creative about getting other opportunities. Like the previous speakers have mentioned, look for chances to turn non-project work into evidence for your competencies. In my case, like I say, it was partly also about sort of selecting, the professional engineering qualification and the Institute of Engineering and Technology that weren't so strict on those requirements, recognizing they still, of course, follow the UK spec. And things like, I don't know, EFIT missions, what might be quite relevant for this audience, can sort of help you with your health and safety components and things. And then so other advice, as I say, not specializing too much early on. It's very tempting if you come in with a strong technical background in a particular topic to kind of want to be the go-to technical guru, even for the more senior engineers. That's quite a warm fuzzy kind of feeling you get for that. But you're probably better off, perhaps like Andreas was saying, putting yourself out there to learn new things and be a bit more vulnerable when you're starting out, rather than trying to be the guru from the get-go. And so, yeah, looking for opportunities in your organization to sort of do secondments or site placements or work in different offices and that sort of thing, if you work for a big enough organization. And on a final comment, just trying to get through this for time. This doesn't really relate to chartership, but I think just in general, sort of self-organization skills obviously help you when you're trying to put together a big package of information about your career and things. So I had a good hard think a couple of years back when I was coming back from shared parental leave and realizing that with a newborn child, or not newborn at the time, but a 1-year-old kid at home, I was going to have to like leave work on time and things like that, not hang around late to finish work anymore. So I really had a bit of self-reflection then around productivity systems and things like that. And so as a sort of specific recommendation, I'd really recommend some of the productivity literature and things. Getting Things Done by David Allen is a classic book, and another slightly more recent one, Deep Work by Cal Newport, is another great book for along those lines. And I think sort of using those productivity systems to help you make sure you do a little bit each week towards your chartership in terms of write-up and things, as a good life skill that you'll use after you get chartered as well. And that's me handing over to the next speaker.
Brilliant. Thank you, Damian. Manuela, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Hi, my name is Manuela Davi, and it's a pleasure to be a member of this panel today and share my experience getting chartered with you. To introduce myself briefly, I work at Jacobs in the UK, in London, and I'm a principal geotechnical engineer. My area of specialization are on seismic hazard assessment and for nuclear industrial facilities, but also earthquake geotechniques and vibration impact assessment within the transportation and infrastructure sector. So very much focused on engineer dynamics. I got chartered in 2017 as a civil engineer member of the ICE. and I followed the European directive route at the time, as I was already chartered in Italy. So if you're interested, now this route is called Recognition of the European Economic Areas and Swiss Professional Qualifications. And if you're interested, keep an eye because on IC website, just to make sure you're updated on any post-Brexit changes. When I started preparing my chartership, I had about 6 years of working experience. So I didn't apply as a graduate. I didn't do a training agreement with my company. And it took me about a couple of years as I was targeting specific skills that I needed to strengthen. Formally, I'm not a delegate engineer or a supervised civil engineer yet, and I'm hoping to become one soon. So question 3 on the main challenges. So I think one of the main challenges at the beginning for me was to understand what the institution was actually requiring, and how to collect the evidence and how to achieve the competencies I felt I was struggling a little bit more to demonstrate, and also how to present it in the right way. So what helped me was at the very start, helped me very much to map out all my experience towards the each of the attributes. This skill matching exercise helped me realize what I achieved so far, but also see things from different angles, as the other speaker were mentioning. I started thinking wider than my job, becoming more aware of commercial, managerial, health and safety aspect, and not just focusing on technical delivery. Discussing these through regular catch-up with my mentor was key, because I could get feedback and could work on those, and also I could get inspired by his own experience. Knowing where I was and where I needed to get to was also very helpful, because it helped me communicate my goals to my line manager through career appraisal, for example. And this was crucial, because this helped me a lot targeting the right opportunity on projects when they arises. For example, when I was working on one of the PSHA project for a UK new built nuclear plant. My main responsibility were on delivering seismic hazard calculations, and but I realized I recognized I needed to strengthen some of the skill side skill, so mainly commercial management. So I was looking for opportunity, and on the side I started also working with the project management team. Tracking financial project cost, budgeting, preparing contracts and specification, and also I took an opportunity to supervise a microtremor survey on site. That was a great experience that gave me a chance to build up my supervision skills, and making sure that the sub-consultant and the surveyor were following the method statement that I was preparing. So that was all experience that counted, and I had a proactive role on seeking for those experiences. And so the other point was how to write things up. So I was really paying attention on using a clear technical language and using some of the keywords that were in the attribute form, but at the same time telling a story. Presenting the project, presenting multiple examples on project where I felt I could demonstrate the competence with more confidence, and I had played a more significant role in the project itself. Keeping always in mind that I was being reviewed by a panel that didn't know me. My advice to those en route to chartership that are in a similar career level stage as I was when I applied, so looking to strengthen and targeting some specific skills, is to see this process really as a great opportunity to develop yourself as an all-around professional, and map out where you are and where you need to get to, and it's good to keep track of your main challenges, of the responsibility that you face on each project on a regular basis, just to have some sort of a career log, as other speakers were mentioning. And engage proactively with your mentors and line manager, and as it is essential at that stage of the career to seek the experience that you're looking for. And to echo as well Barnali advice, always very good to keep your CPD updated, as saves you a lot of time later. And that's me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Manuela. So over to Ziggy.
Thanks, Fiona. It's really been good to listen to everybody's experiences. I'm probably the oldest one of the crew here. Yeah, I'm Ziggy Lipkowski, Associate Director at ARUP, and I became chartered in 1995, so a long, long time ago. Since that time, I've been a delegated engineer, a supervising civil engineer now, and I've helped people get through to chartership with the Institution of Civil Engineers, through the traditional route, through the experience route, help people get through on IPENs, professional engineer in the States, all sorts of other charterships. In terms of what issues I had with charter when I was getting chartered, I guess my biggest concern was being too focused on my technical work, and I didn't really ensure that my civil engineering was sufficiently broad. And it got to the stage that I actually failed one of the old stages in the old chartership process. There used to be a two-stage process. And I suddenly took stock of the situation, and I realized I knew the stuff, but I was too focused on the things which were interesting me. And actually, you know, what, at least for a chartered civil engineer, that they want to, the reviewers want to see that you have that broad level of knowledge. The specialism is great, but they want to see that you've got that broad level of knowledge. So really, the old adage, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. And I failed in at that time, back in the mid-90s. What I would really advise you all to do is, on all the projects you're doing, be it the most technical project or a large project, maybe something like one of the nuclear projects or HS2 or something like that, is actually try and get a big, really good understanding of the job that in its totality. Who are the key parties? What contract is the project working to? Are there any specific client KPIs? How does your work fit into the bigger picture? And I could go on and on and on. That shows that you're taking an understanding, a real interest and gaining an understanding of the bigger picture. And in doing that, you are broadening your knowledge. We tend to think that we have to go on a course to gain knowledge. No, we don't. We can read about things, we can investigate, we can talk to our colleagues, the people who are project managing a particular job, talk to them, find out from them, learn from them. That is really vital to gaining that base understanding that you need. And the other thing is, read the NCE. What are the key things that are going on at this time? You know, if you don't have a good grounding in sustainable development, that will be an issue. So make sure that you are properly involved and understand the key issues that are pushing the profession in the direction it's going at the moment. And I'll leave my ramblings there and let us get on to the question session.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ziggy. So, yeah, thank you to all of our panel for sharing your advice and experience with everyone this lunchtime. I've learned a lot, and I know that everyone else who's attending will have done also. So, yeah, if all of our panel can come turn their cameras on, and we can start Q&A session. So if anyone's got any attendees have got any questions, if you want to type them in the chat and we can read them out, or if you want to raise your hand and you can come off mute and ask them. So I'll just give it a moment or two for anyone to type a question or build up the courage to ask. There's no such thing as a silly question, and I think we've found this lunchtime that everyone on our panel has had a different route to chartership, so there's lots of experience that can be shared here. I think, well, I guess maybe I'll start the Q&A if, well, to give people time. So one question that I'd be interested to know is how, and I guess it was mentioned in a couple of the panel's presentations, is how people have managed to get commercial experience en route to chartership whilst also using and developing technical skills. So I know a number of people mentioned it in their presentations. I don't know, maybe I'll ask Pearce and Damian, because I don't think you mentioned it in your presentations. Just to start off the Q&A.
Yeah, if I maybe answer that one first. So yeah, this is a good question. Thank you, Fiona. I didn't mention that. I think it's an interesting balance, and I completely agree with what Ziggy was highlighting there about asking questions and trying to understand how things fit into the context. That's so important, and I probably didn't do as much of that as I wish I had done. Probably should still be pushing myself occasionally to try and really understand when I get asked something exactly, well, how does that fit in? But the technical side and that commercial understanding, in a sense, they go hand in hand, because you're being asked to contribute because you can bring value to something that because it makes sense and because it fits into that overall understanding. So what I found really valuable, I suppose, because it kind of forces you to understand why you're solving a particular design problem, or basically doing a particular set of equations or something, why that brings value to a client is when you have those opportunities to present your results to them and have that conversation with them. And it's usually not just a simple, well, we've done some calculations and this is what we're showing. It's usually, well, okay, what does that lead to? What's next? What are your drivers? What are you interested in? And so just, yeah, maybe recognizing the value of those conversations, I'd say that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's great. Great response, Chris. I mean, I think specifically in my case, the commercial side, by being sort of a technically focused guy doing perhaps small parts of bigger projects, it sometimes was difficult to get that commercial experience, because you're not going to be in that role. You're not going to be sort of leading a massive project if you're mostly responsible for parts of it. But I did have, over the years, I'd had a number of chances to lead small technical projects in which my discipline was the sort of leader on that, and it might be just me working on it. It might be me and a few colleagues, and so having that, exposure to clients, having to deal with, invoicing and writing proposals, and as Chris was saying, sort of understanding what makes them tick, what's commercially interesting for them. Having accumulated enough of that experience from, odds and sods projects over the years, was kind of what I used in my application. So I guess it's sort of horses for courses, but in the context of this this thing where we're talking about, how can us with some specific skill set tick off these different objectives, for me it was all about sort of accumulating small projects rather than big ones.
Thanks, Chris and Damian. So we're starting to have a few questions in the chat, so thanks for people typing those in. So the first one we have is, what would you say for someone joining a contractor? would be what would be the best ways to gain the required technical experience for chartership, then in brackets, particularly in the dynamics sector. So I realise that everybody on the panel here is working for a consultant. So I don't know, does anyone feel that they have experience or advice that they can share? Ziggy.
I might try and answer that. I mean, whether you're working for a contractor or a consultant, one of the things I would advise anybody to do is try and get seconded for a period in another company. So when I started, I worked for Building Design Partnership, and they seconded me to John Molam to work on site on the Docklands Light Railway. And apart from having to get over my fear of heights, it was a fantastic experience and allowed me to understand how your design work turns into actually building something. And so and we would take contractors and bring them into the consultant's office, and then they would get technical experience. So the key thing is, and companies will do this, is to ask your managers and look at what opportunities they have, because they want people with as broad a knowledge as possible. And so you need to try and show them the benefits of you going to a consultant, getting that technical knowledge, and then bringing it back. So, and yeah, that's what I would say.
Thanks, Ziggy. Does anyone else on the panel have any other advice on that question? Well, I think Ziggy's advice is really valuable there. So hopefully that's been helpful. So the next question we have on the chat is, as time goes by, we justifiably see an increase in focus on sustainability, and it seems that future candidates will need to demonstrate more evidence on this attribute. Could the speakers give us examples from their experience relevant to this attribute? I don't know where to start with here. Maybe Barnali. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, that's a very good. Actually, if you look at the new attributes, as you know that in ICE from next year, from 9 attributes, we are going to 7 attributes, and all attributes, there's a greater emphasis on the UN Sustainable Goals, and climate change and sustainability will become very, very important. Even when we are working in earthquake engineering, it's perhaps a little bit easier for us to show sustainability, because fortunately during my time there was a project that I was working in, which was in Afghanistan, where we were trying to build a hospital in Faizabad. And one of the things there was to talk about different materials, sustainability in terms of using local practice, local materials. So it's again coming back to the same point that this is going to be very, very important for anybody who is going to go for chartership now, to be able to demonstrate an understanding, not only an understanding, but how your projects are meeting the UN Sustainable Goals. So I think that's quite important, and we can find it in many of for us people working in dynamics, I think it's much easier to show sustainability than other parts, people who are doing it in other parts of the business. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Barnali. I see Ziggy's got his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I would advise everybody to read the Rachel Skinner's President's Address when she came in at the 156th President of the ICE, and setting out her goals for what civil engineers should do for with regard to sustainability. So even if you don't get involved with it in a project specific basis, understanding the way that the industry is pushing will help in gaining you a view as to how you can then bring that to the projects you're working on.
Great, thanks, Ziggy. I think I'll maybe also ask this question to Manuela, because you have a very technical background, have you, or technical focus as well in your work, do you have anything to add for examples of sustainability from your experience?
Something that helped me feeling that attribute, because at the beginning also I was struggling as well, understanding exactly, what I need to demonstrate. And it helped me thinking about sustainability in a, in a bigger picture. So it's not just environmental sustainability, but also from an economical point of view, social point of view. So I was giving example, thinking about how do I mitigate, how do I select a particular design solution against others to make sure my final solution is more sustainable from a wider perspective. So think wider, basically.
Great, thank you, Manuela. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question because they are building up in the chat. Someone is asking, Damian, from your experience, are there any advantages or disadvantages of getting chartered through the IET over ICE?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to have a go at that one. I mean, the IET, a couple of positive things about it. It's aiming to be quite a generalist engineering and technology institution, and that has the advantage that you're not sort of trying to squeeze your specific set of skills and so on into a particular shape that the institution's expecting to see. I mean, the ICE is probably more general than, say, the iStructD again. So the ICE is also quite flexible about how you present yourself, but I think the IET is recognizing an even wider set of engineering disciplines. Another advantage, I really like the magazine that comes out. Like I actually get a lot more out of reading the IET magazine than I do out of the ICE. It's sort of no disrespect to folks who like digging holes and things, but I really like the all the sort of techie stuff that you get in the IET mag. So I think those are two really positive things. Disadvantages, I mentioned when I was speaking that very much sort of IET taking on structural and civil engineers and mechanical engineers is quite a new thing. The history kind of comes from the electrical engineering side, and they've kind of more recently expanded into a broader remit. So there's not going to be a whole lot of sort of support from other structural engineers in the institution. You've got me if you want to ask someone. I'm happy to help with that. But at the end of the day, ICE, iStructD have the bigger history in terms of structural and civil engineers, and even for job applications, for example, of course, probably more recognition for a structural or civil role if you've got ICE or iStructD membership.
Great, thanks, Damian. Okay, the next question we have is, well, first of all, thanks all the panel for their stories, which have been really inspiring. So what would you suggest for someone at the beginning of their career trying to deal with the professional and human growth in the civil engineering panorama in the COVID and post-COVID world? The communication aspect of the work experience is completely different now from what the person that's asking this question feels. So I don't know, Andreas, do you want to start with that question? I don't know if you can share.
Yeah,
it's a tricky one.
It's a tricky one, yeah. I think this question refers to the fact that our working practices have changed dramatically in the past year. And like now, we're all sitting at home, quite obviously. And we're all communicating through Teams and Skype every day. We're not seeing each other in the office so often anymore. And yeah, I think that's challenging. I think though when the pandemic hopefully blows over and we can go back to a more normal type of life, we will start to see a more normal service resuming. So we'll start to meet each other in the offices again, and hopefully we'll meet at conferences again, and we'll meet at evening meetings and at the ICE again. So I still see this as a temporary phase, albeit one with lasting consequences for the way we work. So, for example, within Atkins, we are now going forward, regardless of whether there's COVID or not, we are expected to work approximately 50% from home. And that's going to be a lasting thing, which I think is positive. I don't know whether that addressed the question.
I think it's helpful to share different people's experiences, because I guess we're all at different positions at the moment, and it's nice to hear other people's views on this. Damian, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what Andreas said. I think he's quite right to say that, you know, things hopefully will be returning to some degree of normal, but that normal might look different from what it did before. Just sort of harping on about my the point I concluded with in my introduction about sort of being mindful about your productivity and not just being reactive to what comes into your inbox. I think the sort of new way of working, whether it's sort of 50-50 or otherwise, we really have to be sort of strategic about how we use you know, time in the office versus time at home. So I'd sort of suggest folks are really mindful of you know, making sure you get those really good, solid, deep work days in when you're stuck at home or happily working at home, and then try and use the time back in the office to sort of have those water cooler or coffee conversations and be sort of proactive, I guess, there about, you know, having those conversations with senior folks that might be able to help you with some of the chartership stuff. So yeah, I think it's much beyond the chartership thing. Is just like how we can be strategic about how we use our time going forward.
I think that's great advice. Thanks, Damian. So just in the interest of time, I think we'll move on to the next question. So the next one in the chat has already been answered. It was aimed at Barnali, and she's answered it already in the chat. So thank you. So I think we'll maybe just end with this next question, which is, would it be challenging for someone working in the international development sector to get a chartership as such projects are not very technically involved? And I think this potentially links to some of the other things that people have said about gaining experience in different areas. But I just, is there anything that the panel, anyone on the panel wants to share on that? Barnali, you've come off mute. You go.
It's just a very interesting question, because recently I was reviewing a candidate who has done almost 8-9 years of work in international development and was going for the chartership, and they had the same concerns. They had done excellent work all over the world, but technically it was not, as they said, it was not very challenging, but it was very sustainable. It had very good social outcomes. So the way I tried to spin the report, and I kind of I said, do not focus on the technical, but focus at all the consequences and how you're changing lives. And that way the candidate passed. So it just needs a little bit of rethinking on this aspect, in my opinion.
Ziggy.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, and Barnali's spot on. If you look at a definition of a civil engineer, it is incredibly broad. It is not just a technical person that does calculations. It is someone who does logistics. It's someone who manages. It's someone who looks at contract. It's someone who deals with all sorts of different aspects. We as civil engineers have a broad range of potential skills. Some of us specialize more, some of us specialize less. So I'm sure there's more than enough things to do in international development that can help get someone through to being a chartered engineer.
Thanks, Ziggy. So I think we're just after 2 o'clock. So I think, given time, I think we should probably draw this session to a close. So I'd just like to finish by thanking our panel. So Ziggy, Andreas, Damian, Barnali, Chris, and Manuela for giving your time, sharing your advice and experience with us all. I'd also like to thank everyone who's joined this event yeah, for partaking and for answering asking some interesting questions, and our panel for answering them. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good afternoon and hope to see you at future SecEd events. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you.
Thanks
very
Fiona.
much.